Welcome to another episode of Expected Buffalo, the podcast, presented to you again today by One Pie Pizza, 2185 Clinton Street in West Seneca. Open 7 days a week from 9 to 8 p.m. Check out One Pie Pizza at onepiepizza.com. How are we all doing? I'm in a weird mood today. I don't know why. A lot of energy here at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night. Maybe it's because there's a fun hockey game tomorrow, and that kind of gets the juices going. Sabres are back on Saturday, so we'll pick up the remainder of the schedule here as we kind of just play this out and see, I guess, how things go here over the next few months of the season with the trade deadline 2 weeks from Friday. So that is always fun too. So today we're going to get into a few different things. We're going to take a little bit of a break talking. I mean, it may come up while I'm just gabbering, but a little bit of a break from the trade conversation. We're going to get plenty of that in over the next few weeks. We have some guests that I have lined up for Monday, and then we'll see what the other one does next week. With two guests, at least for next week, that'll join me. And we'll get in some trade stuff there and also look at a few other teams. So that is what is on the horizon, but I didn't even tell you what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about today is we're going to get into the roster being healthy again for the first time, probably like 2 months now. So we're going to go through some things. I want to talk about that. We're going to get into a little bit of what to watch for as the season goes along here. And then, of course, we're going to talk about U.S. versus Canada tomorrow. Okay, so let's start, as I said, with our healthy roster that we have here for the first time in quite a long time. So Jordan Greenway was back skating today. Matthias Samuelsson, not today, but he was for the second day in a row, and he was skating before the break. But so he's going to play, though, on Saturday. Matthias Samuelsson is back. Looks like he's going to play on Saturday. Beck Malenstein did return to practice today. We'll see if he also returns to the lineup on Saturday. So where I want to start with, in all of those returns, so we're going to start with Jordan Greenway because he's the interesting one for a few reasons. One, he's one who's been out the longest. Two, he was the one of those three I mentioned that are playing the best. And three, even though I said we're not going to talk about it, he has some trade implications around him being a unrestricted free agent when this season ends. So overall, this season, Greenway, when he's been in the lineup, impressive numbers. One of their better players in the middle six of the lineup. They've missed him dearly, I feel like, at times. His size, the way he plays, his that presence on the third line. He really had something going with Zucker and McLeod earlier in the season. So overall, I think that's they've really missed him, and we're going to see here now that he's back just how much I guess how much they want to utilize him to maybe showcase him, to just get him back in the flow. And then maybe even get a final answer for themselves of what they truly want to do with him, because they could just keep him, resign him, and not trade him in 2 weeks. That's on the table. I would personally be surprised if that's what ends up happening. But maybe let's say Zucker doesn't go their way and they flip the focus to Greenway. Plausible, but we'll save that for another day conversation. The interesting thing to me with Greenway is where they're going to put him. So he appears, as the last 2 days of practice, he is skating on a line with Dylan Cozens and Jack Quinn. Okay, I don't think that's a great fit, but last time I challenged the fit with Greenway, that seemed to be worked out pretty well with McLeod and Zucker. So maybe this works out here. And then Lindy Ruff was on WGR 550 this morning and talked about a variety of things, of course, but really when he talked about Greenway and Cozens, caught my attention. So I'm going to read you the quote that really stood out to me, and then, break that down a little bit, what that all says. So here's the exact quote. I watched some games from last year where Greenway and Cozens played together. So looking at maybe that's some chemistry that we can develop into a pretty heavy line that can score some goals to be good defending line for us. Okay. So there's a few things here. And again, this is from his interview with WGR 550 this morning. the defense part is what immediately jumped out to me. And it's not because of Greenway. I think Greenway is an excellent defensive forward. I think he showed that throughout his career. I think he showed that over the last few years being in Buffalo. Great defensive forward. My problem is the other two players in that line. Jack Quinn in particular is not a good defensive forward, especially this season. And Dylan Cozens, like this whole with him defense thing really's got to stop. Like I think we're like on our second or third coach now with the defense thing for Cozens. Like it's not going to happen. There's been negative defensive results for 3 years in a row now. There's just too many mistakes with the puck. He just doesn't see the play good enough. Doesn't react quick enough. It's okay. He doesn't have to be, this solid defensive forward. He's just not going to be. And I wish they would accept that. And I think you're putting a lot on Greenway's plate if you're expecting him to go in there and really be a difference maker defensively for that line. Because he's really, essentially he'll have to carry those two because there's not, neither of them are really that good at it. So that was the part that kind of, I don't know, maybe raised my attention a little bit. And then there's the first part of the quote. So Ruff said he went back and watched games from last year where Greenway and Cozens played together. So before I get into all this, I get it. Where Ruff is right now, it's difficult to find a fit for Cozens and Quinn as well. And that maybe is the reason why both their names are out there in trade conversations. Because you have Kulich, who has jumped over Cozens and is playing on that first line with Tage and Peterka. You have McLeod, who it seems essentially has jumped, and now he's playing with Zucker in what you would be presumed your second line, and Tuch too, for that matter. So now we're dropping. He went from a first line, we started the second line, then to a first line. Now we're down to a third line for Cozens, talking about defensive heavy line, like ugh. For a $7 million centerman, this is not going well already. Anyways, I understand he's trying to find a fit, and you have the players you work with, and you try to put it together and see how it works. So before I get into any of this stuff I'm going to go through, I get it. I completely understand that. Okay, so let's go to Greenway and Cozens last season. So they played 200, and I think it was, I don't have it written down here, but I think it was like 263, 236 minutes together last year. Let me just read you some of the numbers that those two put together when they were on a line in those 236 minutes. Their 5-on-5 shot share, their Corsi was 46%. Their 5-on-5 expected goal share was 42%. So they had a 2.19 expected goals for per 60 and a 3.08 expected goals against per 60. So didn't generate a lot offensively, didn't do a good job reducing quality against defensively. So that's not great. Interesting part is their goal differential. They're actually at 53%. Now, this is low volume scoring. Their goals for per 60 were 2.28, and their goals against were 1.98. So interesting that they allowed a lot of quality, but not a lot of pucks win the net. They had a 94% save on ice save percentage. So maybe that's a little bit of luck there. Whatever. I mean, I guess the actual results, if you were net positive, while it really wasn't going that great overall for the most part. Now, when I was going through this, I looked at just those two, and then I started thinking to myself, okay, who did these guys really even play with last year? Because I can't remember. And 236 minutes is a lot. It's not a small sample. So I went back and looked who the majority of these minutes were played with. 35 minutes of them was played with Thompson. The remaining minutes, for the most part, were split between Zach Benson and Casey Middlestat. Okay. First thing that pops in when I say that, Tage Thompson, Zach Benson, Casey Middlestat. Well, let me see what those Tage minutes look like. Let me see if playing with Thompson dragged their numbers up a little bit. Because we know Tage is himself a line driver. He does that wherever he plays. He really moves along, those teams. And you can tell when he's in the lineup, the offense just flows better. So my theory or assumption turned out to be accurate. So Cozens and Greenway, and Thompson, the three of them together, had pretty good numbers in those 35 minutes. But that 35-minute number is a pretty small sample to the rest of the minutes they played. Let's look at the remainder of that sample outside of those 35 minutes. Now, to be clear before I get into this, we're also getting into very small sample sizes, which, take it for what it's worth, but the numbers are the numbers here. So, and you could say a little bit over 200 minutes away from Thompson, these are the numbers that Greenway and Cozens put up when they were on the ice together. I'll give you a warning. They're worse than the numbers that I read a few minutes ago. On ice 5-on-5 shot share, their Corsi 43%. On ice 5-on-5 expected goal share 36%. And their goal differential dropped from 53 to 50%. So they still broke even, but not that good. So this tells us that when those two were put together last season, away from Thompson, the results weren't good. The numbers weren't good. Now, does that mean that has to be the case this season? With the new coach, it should be mentioned. That could matter here. It's a new system. It's a new way of playing. That could play into it here. I don't know. I mean, it's 200 minutes. It's not nothing, but it's not a ton. So I guess the overall point that I'm going to with it is I just think ultimately I have concerns about that working. And, while Cozens really hasn't worked with anybody and it kind of is what it is type thing, I have some hesitation, not hesitation, but what ultimately I could see a problem happening here is kind of where we started this conversation that I kind of said I wasn't going to talk about, but here I am talking about it. Is if Greenway starts off, let's say, slowly, it doesn't go well with Cozens and Quinn. The deadline is 2 weeks away. I wonder if that hurts his value a little bit. Some teams that are maybe interested in him are looking to see how he's going to come back and perform from that injury. And if it doesn't start well out of the gate, well, does that hurt maybe his value? I mean, does it maybe not matter this late with 2 weeks before the deadline? Teams kind of know who he is, and then they're just going to, it is what it is. If they want to get him, they're going to go after him. Maybe. But it's something I thought about, and Ruff's really not one to sit with something long. I think if it doesn't work for a game or two, he'll split that up and get Greenway with somebody else, and we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I wanted to dive into that a little bit because I just think that is, and it's kind of been that way all season long, where that is the one group where, or it seems like there's always one line that is just doesn't belong, essentially. You had your fourth line, which is your fourth line. Your first and your second lines were set, and then your third line, well, since Greenway's been out at least, just has never really been able to fit. You just don't have the guys that could play in that role or the right matching of skill sets to play on that line. And we're seeing that potentially play out here. I mean, we don't know. We'll see. Maybe this Cozens, Greenway, and Quinn line works perfectly fine. It's plausible. It's possible. It's very possible. A bigger body with two guys that create space. Quinn can be your finisher. Maybe Cozens can help set up. I don't know. I think there's I'm lacking a puck distributor on that line, but if there's going to be a heavy line that I hope isn't used in defensive situations or minutes, but if they are, then maybe they're asked to play a different role, which I don't think you want Cozens and Quinn doing that, but I don't know. Essentially, we're just going to have to see how it all plays out here. It's definitely something that I'll be watching, on Saturday, and then we'll see how this group sticks together as you move into the games following that. Okay, moving beyond that. So, Matthias Samuelsson is back. That's good, I guess. He had that foot injury. There was a report that he'd be out for the season. He's not, so he gets back in there. I guess we'll see how much that really helps them. Beck Malenstein, I think, is kind of important to get back, not only for what he does bring in that fourth line with an energy, speed, the way he plays. I think it's his penalty kill impact, I think, is pretty important. So, hopefully they do have him back on Saturday as well. All right, let's shift here. We spent 15 minutes talking about pretty much Jordan Greenway and Dylan Cozens playing together. So let's shift our focus here to what we're going to watch for over the next, I don't know, what is it, like 20-something games, I think is what it works out to be. Because realistically, like the playoffs are not something we're going to push for. It's not going to be a real thing. And maybe they'll go nuts and they'll win 8 or 9 games. And who knows, it'll be a different conversation in a month. But as of now, that seems to be out of the picture. And we're kind of just hanging out over the next 20-something games and just seeing this one out for a 14th year without playoffs. So how do we make this interesting? What do we look for? What do we watch for? Let me try to give you a few tips if you're somebody who's just not going to turn them off completely and does want to look for something. So let's talk about a few things that we can look towards. So I have a few notes here. The first thing I want to look for is consistency. And this goes into a few different levels. I want to see the team consistently play better. I want to see the team consistently be a good penalty kill team. I would like to see the goaltending consistently perform at a very least an average level to slightly above average level. Lukin has been very up and down this year. The Nashville game still sits in my head, and maybe he was a little bit banged up and he wasn't 100%, and that played into it too. But I really want to start seeing some consistency there because we actually, honestly, Reimer has given the consistency. If you can argue, if you're including Levi, the goaltender has probably been the most consistent throughout the entire season has been James Reimer. So Luukkonen, I guess, to be more specific, is where I want to see that consistency from. Beyond that, what else? Who gets an extended look after the deadline? So Isaac Rosane, if they do move a couple forwards, you would say perhaps he's going to get a good look for maybe 25 or so games to get an idea what you have there if a roster spot opens. Tyson Kozak could be back up, although he's injured right now for at least a couple weeks. So that's an unfortunate turn of events for him, who probably would be back up here pretty soon. Ryan Johnson's another one potentially if they move out some defensemen, if they want to give him a look to see really what he is at the NHL level. He's been all right down in the AHL, so I guess you could say you can give him a look. It wouldn't hurt anything. And then beyond that, I don't really know anybody that would get a look. I mean, Noah Ostlund's playing well right now, but I don't think you're doing that. I would just leave him down there. Wahlberg, I would leave down there. Hellenius, a little bit of a rut right now. So I'd leave him down there. Let's let him keep going. Maybe you can reward like Brett Murray with a quick look, or Dune's played pretty well for them, or Dunn has played really well for them, so you can give him a look potentially. But I don't know, what is that really for the future? Nothing crazy. So those 3 guys, I think, are the ones you're going to look at. Maybe Levi gets a game or 2, but honestly, the way his NHL season has gone this year, I wouldn't touch him. Just let him stay down there and just keep going. Just keep building on what he's got going there. I would just leave him alone and let the Amerks go on their way towards cementing themselves in the playoff picture and seedings and all of that. So those are probably the 3 guys that we'll see if they get an extended look after the deadline. Also worth mentioning, someone did ask me about this. With the deadline, one thing that is kind of a secondary thing is we have that you have to send players down before a certain time to make sure they're eligible for the AHL playoffs. Someone asked me recently, who on that's up with the Sabres right now would do that with. At the time, Kozak was up on the roster, so I thought they would do that with him. But he's down in the AHL now, so maybe that's, with his injury, I don't think it's going to matter because he'll be on the AHL roster anyways. The one particular one is Jiri Kulich. So what I think is going to happen here, and Amerks fans might not like this, I don't think they're getting him back. He is playing first-line center for them right now. I think what will end up happening here is they will tell him that he's an NHL player, and we are going to treat you as such. You do not need to go to the AHL and play more games. You are now a full-time NHL player, and you will be treated as such. Therefore, I would anticipate that he's not given back to the Amerks. Now, they could just do the roster move to do the roster move and leave that flexibility open. But my guess, kind of how they handled some other guys, that I don't think that they'll do that. Like Benson's a good example last year. They could have at one point of the season sent him down to the AHL for the playoffs, and he could have played for the Amerks, but they chose not to do that because he's an NHL player. And I think that's the same situation that we're going to see unfold with Kulich. Speaking of Kulich, on a different note, one of the things to watch for moving forward the rest of the season is to see if Kulich can maintain his spot on that top line. Does he continue to be productive offensively? Does he continue to be solid defensively when called upon? Does he continue to look like he belongs on that top line, or at the very least in a top 6 role? We'll debate in the offseason if they should rely upon him to be a second-line center or even a first-line center, which we'll get to in a minute, or if they should bring in one or two guys to play over him and shelter him and all that. We have time to debate that up, down, sideways, and backwards all summer long while we're watching everybody else have fun in the playoffs. I just want to see that he keeps it going. He doesn't hit a wall. I think probably getting a 2-week break here probably prevents him from doing that. It gives him a little bit of break, then time to reset. But I'm very curious to watch how that goes over the next 20 or so games, to lock that in. It's something that you can count on moving forward into next season. And the last thing I have on my list here, which coincides with that, is where they're going to play Tage. So is he ever going to go back to center? I get it. He's playing very well on the wing. He has chemistry with Kulich. He has chemistry with Peterka. I understand leaving him in that spot and just letting it go and letting it flourish as your top offensive line. Fine. But let's say he stays there the rest of the season on the wing. What is the plan next season? Is he a center next season, or is he a winger? Because if he's a winger, for me, I then have alarm bells going off everywhere. Because then my centers, as of right now, let's say, because we don't know what's going to happen going into next season, contractually, my centers are Kulich, Cozens, McLeod, Krebs. That doesn't give you a lot of confidence. Cozens we're seeing struggle, and it's not working. McLeod is fine, but you can't ask him to be a first-line center. You probably can't ask him consistently to even be a second-line center. That's a lot to ask out of him. And that puts him in an unfair position because that's not the player he is. He is a third-line center that can give you second-line minutes in certain situations, but primarily he fits best as a third-line center. We got to stop putting guys in areas that they do not succeed. And then I'm going to have a 21-year-old be my top center? So then it gets back to the conversation of, well, what are you going to do about it in the summer? Or even over the next 2 weeks? Are you going to bring in a center? But who? Of course, Elias Pettersson is out there. You do that, and you can use Cozens as a piece of that, and then you slot in Kulich as 2, McLeod as 3, and you're on your way, and that's more palatable. Let's say Pettersson doesn't move. Well, I mean, sitting here right now, I don't know. There's not a lot of centers, top 6 centers at least, that are out there. Of course, in the summer, things could change. Guys can come available. Teams could have bad playoff runs. Teams want to make changes and all of that. But just getting that position is tough. Getting a top 6 centerman is not an easy task in this league. And that's why when Pettersson was available, a lot of teams, including the Sabres, were in on that because those guys just aren't available. They're hard to get. Same thing with the right shot defensemen, as we can see. They're difficult to get, and those are the 2 positions they need, unfortunately. So I'm curious. I'm very curious where Tage plays the rest of the season. I would guess it's probably at wing. But what are they going to do next year? Where do they see him on this team next year? If Lindy Ruff is still the coach, you would probably think he thinks he's a better winger, and that's where he's going to put him. So you're going to have to spend an offseason treating that accordingly. Fascinating. It's really going to be a fascinating conversation, I think, to have. over the summer is where he fits and how this team sees him. That'll be a good conversation to go over. Okay, 25 minutes. I see someone in the chat, by the way, put Zegras as the center option. Trevor Zegras, I'm pretty sure. I mean, he might play center in Anaheim, but I don't think he best fits as a centerman. I think he's a winger, so that doesn't really solve that issue either. Okay, talked about the team for 25 minutes here. Let's talk about the big night that we have ahead of ourselves tomorrow. And it really, I appreciate this. This is the benefits of not recording a podcast earlier in the day. When I put this segment on my show list here, this is before the Thompson news came out. So now this spices the conversation up a little bit more. Tage and Brett Pesce were having called up by the U.S. team to go to Boston to be there in case of illness or injury, and they have to play in the championship game tomorrow. In order for Thompson to play, there would need to be at least 2 players out of the lineup. Unlikely, but both of the Chucks are banged up. Both of them say they're going to play tomorrow. Matthews is banged up, but it seems like he's fine and will play. But if there's a bug running through that team, maybe there's 1 or 2 guys that won't be able to play, and he'll find his way in. It's possible. But I think that the league itself is handling this properly with these substitutes and call-ups. With Harley for Canada, and then Tage and Pesce, and when it was going to be Quinn Hughes, and it's not now. I think they're handling it correctly. Those guys should not play. And I understand Quinn Hughes was on the initial roster and then had to back out because of the injury. But really, in my opinion, the way the rules should be pretty cut and clean. The roster that you showed up to Montreal with, since that's all you're allowed to bring, you can't play anybody else unless you cannot ice a team of 12 forwards and 6 defensemen. Only in that scenario should there be another one of your call-ups that then be allowed to play. And that's how they're handling it. And I think that's great. I'm glad that's what they're doing. And that's the way they're going about it. As for the game itself, it's going to be hella fun. At least I sure hope so. But I think it's going to be hella fun. In Boston, so not in Montreal this time. We'll see how the vibes early in the game go for that, if you know what I mean. And then what does it look like to start things out? Do we get all the fights again? Does Canada come out and try to send a message early and they start things? I think it's going to be fascinating to see the first minute or 2 of that game goes. And then, of course, like it did last time, whether there is stuff or not stuff, it'll settle in. Everybody will get into their groove, and then we'll start going. So what are few key things for me for tomorrow? 1, I think Charlie McAvoy being out for the U.S. is a big deal. He has been really good this tournament. He was particularly important against the Canadian team in the first game. I know he was on the ice when McDavid skated through the entire team. But nonetheless, I think that is going to be a huge absence for them. On the flip side of things for Canada, they're getting Cale Makar back this time, which I think will be a big boost for them. So you could say, arguably, the U.S. team loses its best defenseman. The Canadian team gains their best defenseman. So that's kind of a flip there. And I think that's going to play out pretty importantly for various reasons. Canadian power play, U.S. penalty kill, and then also McAvoy's 5-on-5 play in the matchups. And I think it's going to be critical. It's going to be important. And look, both of these teams have so much talent on their roster. And there are stars up and down it. It is a deep team on both ends. Goals can come from any line. There can be impactful players from anywhere. Jake Gensel had 2 goals in the first game. McDavid was a big star in the first game. Not a big star, but he had that big goal. McKinnon and Crosby were relatively quiet, but they're going to be relatively quiet this time. All things to look at. And Matthews and Eichel and all their big dogs on the U.S. team, the Chucks, are they going to step up and be impactful as well this game? We're going to see that all plays out. But I think the most important thing for the U.S. team in order for them to win this game is Connor Hellebuyck has to, without a doubt, outplay Jordan Binnington. Hellebuyck has to play a good game, just like he did in that first game. He has to be a wall for them. And they have to take advantage of Binnington like they did in the first game. But Hellebuyck, I think, is more important because, don't get me wrong, arguably the best goaltender in the world, consistently, back-to-back-to-back years, he is one of arguably maybe 3 guys in the entire league that consistently puts up the numbers that he puts up on a regular season basis. Where it starts to get a little bit shaky is in postseason and big moments like that. We saw it again last year in the playoffs. He was not very good for Winnipeg. So in this situation, I want to see him play well in a big game. I want to see him step up for his team, play like the best goaltender in the world, and help your team win this tournament. And I think they need that. And I think if he is not good to great in this game, then the U.S. team probably doesn't have a chance. I think that is critical. You can maybe even say the most important thing over Makar coming back and McAvoy going out. I think the goaltending matchup in this game is a big advantage for the U.S., and they need to use it as such. We need to see it play out that way. But yeah, I'm excited. I really, I can't wait to see how this plays out tomorrow. You know, it's going to interfere with Mailbag Thursday. I haven't really decided what I'm going to do there yet. I might try to sneak it in a little bit early before the game, or maybe during intermission. I don't know. We'll see how that whole thing plays out. But buckle up. We're going to have some fun tomorrow. Best on best, U.S. Canada for the second time, to see which country gets to come on top and have bragging rights for the next little bit until the next term, which I believe is the Olympics, 1 year like this time next year. So the Olympics, and then we're going to have the World Cup of Hockey. So a lot of best on best we're going to get here, but we're going to see who gets bragging rights first tomorrow in Boston. All right. I think that's it for me. I don't need to ramble on again about anything else. We'll probably talk tomorrow. I'm going to try to get some time and then to go over the questions. I do have a few already, but if you did want to send in a question, again, remember it is XB Pod Mailbag. That is XB Pod Mailbag at gmail.com. So send in your questions if you want to that email. It's easier for me to consolidate everything into that email, so that's why I asked that you put it there. So yeah, send in your email, send in your questions. Like I said, I have a few for tomorrow already, and we're probably not going to go very long depending on when I get that in because of the game. So yeah, that's it for tonight. Thanks everybody for listening, and enjoy the game tomorrow, and we'll talk to you later. See ya.